There's been litigation over the past few decades between Florida, Georgia, and Alabama over this river system, the Apalachicola, Chattahoochee, Flint river system. The challenge that has been ongoing is the state's ability to share this water in a way that everybody's needs get met.
Florida is suing the state of Georgia because it's overusing its water resources.
23 years later, I find myself in the delta of that river system discussing some of the same issues that were affecting the system 23 years ago.
The decades-long dispute is affecting businesses up and down this street in Apalachicola.
It's been tough to see, these people have to go find other work.
Florida has suffered harm from the decreased fresh water flows.
We all depend on it. And what they don't let us have, it destroys our livelihood.
With all three states having a stake in this river, it's leading to a war over water.
We didn't realize how good we had it.
I got so attached to this place when I was a kid. My parents would bring me out here. And then it was all covered in trees. You could barely see even the earthworks that you see today. But the stories that you would, and you learn more about it and read more about it. And so prehistoric peoples, paddled up and down the river and dug out canoes and traded with each other. And they would trade goods as far north as Tennessee and North Georgia and the mountains. And up there you'll find conch shells and things like that they had brought from the Gulf and traded upstream. And so it's always been an avenue of commerce. Well, when the United States came along, the United States, suddenly this became two separate European-style nations. You had the United States starting at the Georgia line, and you had Spain starting, at the Florida line. And suddenly this Apalachicola River was not the free avenue of commerce that it had been. And so you've had all these dramatic changes through history, but the river is what has tied it together and led to a lot of the violence that has happened, in this valley.
When I got out of college, I went out west and tried to look for a new place and ran rivers out there for about 10 years. And when I came back to the Gulf, which I was missing terribly, I had the opportunity to go to Apalachicola Bay and spend time working for the Nature Conservancy on the small island of Dog Island. And there I got introduced to some of the productivity issues and things that were going on in Apalachicola Bay and began to understand what a really unique and productive system it was. And it was easy to fall in love with. It's about a 19,600 square mile basin, so it's quite large in 3 states. It starts up in the very northern part of Georgia in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains and runs about 500 miles south to the Gulf of Mexico in Florida on the North Gulf Coast. It runs through, or begins up in the granite Piedmont Formation, up closer to the mountains, and then it goes into the Doherty Plain, which is a relatively flat, more lime rock based geology, and then comes into the Apalachicola and drops down into the coastal plain before it enters the Gulf of Mexico.
This is a place that is so rich in history and culture. People, I believe, with the knowing the story better, I think a line of people would form to come here. And that's one of the real shames of this and of the Apalachicola Basin itself, is that we have so much here that people don't know is here. This was the largest colony of free African Americans in North America at the time it existed. They had put their foot down and declared that they were free people, and they fought to the death for their freedom. This part of the bluff projects out into the river just a little bit. And if you look to the south, you can see for 2 miles down the river, which was probably about the maximum range of the cannons here. So for 2 miles, if an enemy ship approached, they could fire on them from this point. When the battle took place here on July 27, 1816, the American gunboats came into range at as far down as you can see on the river. American troops and Creek warriors have surrounded the fort for a week at this point. They've not been able to make even a dent in the defenses of the fort, and so they decide they're going to bring the gunboats up. The Americans fired 5 shots from 2 different boats. They fired 4, just kind of testing the range, and then they thought, well, maybe we can lob one over behind the fort. And what happened was it hit a pine tree and ricocheted off of a pine tree down into the gunpowder magazine. The Army estimated that 270 died in a flash, just gone. These were people who came here and became free, and they fought for that freedom rather than surrender and go back into slavery. This river basin is full of this type of history. People don't know these stories. You know, within a couple of miles of where we stand is one of the largest colonies of pitcher plants in the world. And you have all of those kinds of things, the Toria trees and the Florida yew trees, you know, further north, the estuary and the oyster beds and the seafood and all of that. There is so much here that I think we're better suited now to preserve it than we would have been 50 or 60 years ago had it developed.
I grew up just upstream on the floodplain of the Flint River, and spent a lot of time on that river fishing and recreating as a kid. Went to school in Atlanta at Georgia Tech. My role here at the Coastal and Marine Lab is I'm a fisheries biologist. My expertise is life history of fishes, particularly age growth and reproduction. There are a number of different commercially and recreationally important species that depend on a healthy Apalachicola River, not just in terms of water quality, but in terms of water quantity. Things that we love to eat and catch, bay scallops, shrimp, blue crabs, groupers, even endangered species like sturgeon are tied to a healthy Apalachicola River. So it's really important for us to ensure for future generations that we take care of this river system.
You have a fishing industry that is built on the productivity that occurs in both inshore in the bay, in the estuary, and offshore where the mature species are. So oysters, obviously, they don't move around much, so they're confined there in the bay. And the salinity of the bay and the productivity of the oysters is all driven again by those nutrients that come in.
My great-granddaddy's a fisherman. My granddaddy was mostly a shrimperman, oysterman. My dad was a crabber, oysterman. Me, I love to do it all. I mean, until the 2000s, I considered myself as a commercial fisherman. I did it all. Growing up here, when we had, we used to work in the bay, enjoy the bay, come up here and then weekends enjoy the river system. We used to make river trips all the way up to Lake Seminole and going up, up there on oyster boats. We'd 5 or 6 oyster boats get together and 20 people or so and do a weekend cruise up at Lake Seminole. Stay the night up there and come back. We used to, really enjoy what we had, but things just got so tight and so hard. The funding, having extra money is hard now.
I have the 13-mile oyster house. I have a 13-mile retail market in town. I have a shrimp house, processing plant, ice house, shrimp boats, oyster boats, trucks. We do a little bit from start to almost the end game, selling to the restaurants and seafood markets and things like that. My dad bought it from my mother's side of the family December 1957. Then it was primarily just an oyster house. We had a few small bay shrimp boats that we unloaded here. And the year I started kindergarten, we moved to Apalachicola, which is 13 miles from here. And my dad got into the shrimp business as well. And then it just grew from there.
I've been fishing since I was 16 years old. I'm 51 now, so quite a while. The water wars has really affected us down here on the bottom end of the chain. We feel the hurt probably more so than any of us because we depend on the water for our livelihood.
When we started having issues with our bay, when we started having lack of fresh water, is when I started getting involved about it. Noticing that my livelihood was in jeopardy.
The oyster industry in Apalachicola Bay has declined probably 80 to 90%. In my opinion, the lack of fresh water has created the dilemma.
We know that riverine discharge has a direct effect on oyster populations. They need that freshwater influx. If the bay gets too salty, if it gets too saline, then predators and disease come in and really stress the population of oysters.
They grow because of the fresh water and the nutrients, but what happens to the industry when the river drops down really low and those nutrients aren't coming is the phytoplankton crash. The oysters don't have the nourishment to grow as fast as they normally do, and when the bay gets more salty, there are predators that come into the bay that actually eat the oysters.
It's just not being a fair situation, it's just being a survival situation is what we're after, There's never a fair on anything, but there is a survival. And you got to have something to have a survival rate with this river system in the bay.
They've got to come up with some kind of solution to keep a steady flow of fresh water coming down the river like we used to have.
It's a struggle day by day to keep ourselves going. It's part of life that we've been dealt. We're strong. We as a fishery is going to make it. But it's hard when they hold the water up there and use it like they want to use it, not let us have what Mother Nature has allowed us to use.
I used to have several different work boats, and I'm down to about one decent boat to work off of. And it's a struggle for all of them. This is a way of life and a way of living. I mean, these boys I went to school with and the young ones coming up, they want to do what their mom and dad was doing, especially their dad, working the bay. And education wasn't important. But now we're pushing hard on education because the bay just is not there to support.
People working for me, families, that depended on an income to raise their kids, it's gone, I realize you gotta adapt and make changes with the times, but you're doing away with a lot of history here, in my opinion.
My income in the 90s was at least 60% better than my income since 2000. I'm hoping to be able to sustain something of a harvest, a commercial harvest in the bay. It may never be large scale like it was before, but I'm hoping for at least some kind of production coming out of the bay, commercial.
I love it. I love the oyster business. It's not all about the money to me. It's a way of life. It's not good,
What you hear about in the news and in the lawsuit is all about the oysters. But truly this is a problem and a serious problem for the entire ecosystem. You're losing your oysters, but you're also losing your shrimp, your blue crab, your fish, and up in the floodplain, your entire forest is thinning out. You're losing the tupelo honey industry. It is diminished. And just the overall growth and productivity of all of the forest in the floodplain is being diminished.
The tupelo honey is basically a tree that grows out on the river. It's along the borderlines and the edges of where the water is. It's not really a tree that's vindictive to a lot of different areas. It's primarily right here along the Apalachicola Basin, probably about a 30-mile, 40-mile radius or stretch of the river produces this type of tree.
My family's been in it for years and years and knows the ins and outs, and it's real hard, when you know there's something wrong with your bees, but you absolutely can't figure out what it is to keep them alive. Tupelo honey is one of those honeys that it don't sugar. It don't ever go bad, with the exception of just a few. Will tell you that it's a superior honey. The blooms are found out in the swamp, in the lowland, in the low-lying areas around the water, and it takes a pretty well-matured tree to make a bloom that have enough blooms on it to sustain the bees.
The water and the minerals that the tree grow in is what produce the flavor of tupelo honey.
You don't get the high water and it don't stay up like it used to. Right. Therefore the swamp's dried up. So you don't, tupelo, to have nectar and a bloom, you have to have moisture. And that's just something we're lacking, I feel like, in the bee business as far as tupelo goes. If you don't have moisture in the swamp, it's hard for the bees to get anything out of the bloom.
I've been in beekeeping for roughly 5 years. And 3 of the 5 years we did not produce any tupelo honey because of the water levels up and down, and then that weakens the tree so that it don't produce a high level bloom which falls off easy. Well, now that affects next year's blooming season too.
What you have occurring is a loss of almost 4 million tupelo trees out in the floodplain. And so that in itself affects the production of honey. But it's also affecting the organic matter and the nutrients that are carried down to the bay, because the tupelo trees have a tremendous amount of leaf litter when they lose their leaves in the wintertime, and that has historically made up a big part of the organics on the floor of the floodplain. So when you start losing that, then the composition of your soil changes and the things that live in the soil, and so what's getting to the bay is diminished as well. So not only are you harming the bay with that lack of fresh water, you're also going to lose to some degree your nutrients, you're going to lose your honey production, which is another industry that the Apalachicola Basin has thrived on since the early 1800s.
You have people who rely on the river. You have the guys that do the oyster, and you have the guys that do the shrimping, the guys that do the fishing, the guys that work off the river, deadhead loggers, beekeepers, people who all are directly affected. Not just that, tourism. I mean, without a flourishing economy, where you have shops that are open and things like that, around the river, that's going to all dry up.
This town here in particular has depended on tupelo honey for years. I know some beekeepers that have been in this business for over 100 years. And whenever you start taking the resource out of the small town, well, now we depend on having to travel to produce income where we should be able to produce that here and never leave home.
20 years ago, you probably had, I'd say, 20% to 30%, more beekeepers than you do now. Technically, it shouldn't be that way. If it should be like with any other business, it should be growing.
When you take away our ability to produce this type of honey, and to the ones that live in it and depend on it for either a source of income or even a food product, source for your home to eat, well, then that affects both of those tremendously.
As somebody who's been in it his whole life, but you got, when you start getting up in Georgia and all these people, the row cropping and stuff's getting to be a lot more predominant. It's a lot more people, so there's a lot more demand for food. And the water that used to come down the river, it just don't make it there anymore. It's used up on irrigation, it's used up on cattle, it's used up on a lot of things above us that keeps the water from reaching this area like it used to. And when you rob the water from the swamp and you rob the water from the surrounding areas, something's got to give. Something's going to change for sure. And I'm sure the dam, their way of generating electricity and things like that above us has changed a lot because there's a lot more need for electrical consumption and things like that. So there's a lot more, fluctuation in the river height. It never just comes up and stays up like it used to for years. It don't do that anymore. It might come up and stay up for a week or two, and then it's back bone dry again. I think it's going to take the farming community, the beekeeping community, the people on the river, to come together as a whole to figure out what's going to work, because no one person's going to have an answer. This is bigger than just one person. Without bees, and there ain't going to be food. There's not going to be. Tupelo's a real small notch, on the ladder of honey, and even honey for that matter. That's not something we have to have as human beings, but we have to have pollination, and we have to have bees.
Apalachicola River has been such a treasure that has been part of here since I've been a kid. I've been going over to Franklin County as long as I can remember, since I was knee-high. And the river is such an important piece of what happens over there in so many different aspects. What's been pretty cool about it over the years is watching is how our population's grown and how the district has grown in Franklin County. The river tends to swell and it supports everything and everybody around it. Now here we are, fast forward 2017, and the one thing that is truly the lifeblood of our entire our being over there, part of everyone's way of living, is literally drying up.
My great-grandmother, grandfather lived here, and they were here back in the in the 19th century, and so my family has had deep roots here, and we've all lived in short distance from the river. I used to live on River Street in Bluntstown, and all my ancestors have been right here. for generations, and it's a special place. And for those who have seen the Apalachicola River for the first time, and haven't been accustomed to being on it like yourself, you see how beautiful it is. So those of us who have been here for generations have a very, very special love and respect for that river.
I owned and operated a kayak business for close to a decade, so I spent time bringing people out here. I really enjoy being on the water and on a paddleboard or in a kayak. It's one of my all-time favorite things to do. So the first time I paddled down the river, did the full length in 2011, as I mentioned, with the River Trek group, which is a campaign of Apalachicola Riverkeeper. I got to really experience the river from top to bottom, so to speak. It was a life-changing experience, and I smile when I say that because I helped coordinate River Trek for some years and do that in a board capacity. But every year we take a group of paddlers, they kayak camp up and down the river, so they spend 5 days out there paddling, and at least 2 to 3 people every single year come back and say, "Oh, that was a life-changing experience." And I say, "Well, yeah, I know, because I had that life-changing experience too." And so I kid about it, but it's true to actually connect and experience and be in a place uninterrupted, disconnected, so to speak, from all the technology of the world that really is energizing. And so that helped me become really in love with the Apalachicola River and helped me personally better understand why we need to protect it.
One of the issues that's of particular importance with Apalachicola Bay and water usage is this notion of the Green River effect. And what that means is in the springtime, under natural flood conditions, the Apalachicola River would send a plume of nutrient-rich water offshore, and that nutrient-rich water sort of bathes the shelf-edge mesophotic reefs. And that habitat is of particular importance to commercially valuable grouper species, several of them that use that habitat. And if the flood conditions are favorable, and if the timing is right, then the groupers will spawn at such a time to coincide with that phytoplankton bloom stimulated by the river discharge. And when you have that match of those two events, the larval groupers will have a really strong year class that year. They'll be very successful, plenty of resources, food to eat, and that sort of thing.
In the 40s, in the 1940s across the United States, just as a general trend of what was happening, we planners, designers, engineers, policymakers, we spent a lot of time harnessing Mother Nature's power, if you will, so to speak. So for example, that's a time when a lot of dams were planned and reservoirs were planned and hydroelectric was, all the rage, and we disrupted entire river systems in that process. And that has happened here as well. So now we have numerous reservoirs, dams built on a river system that was once a complete and flowing system of a connected river. It was one river system that's been interrupted all along its path. So there's going to be ecological changes all along the way, and that's going to affect aquatic habitat, wildlife habitat, even the patterns of humans on a river change when you put in bridges and dams, for better or worse. And what we're seeing is the worst part of that, as again, as a result of the freshwater flow not making it to the Apalachicola Bay.
The genesis of the water wars is that as the population's grown in Georgia, their water needs have increased as the years have gone by. They have a reservoir up there, to keep it very simple, and as the population grows, that reservoir is their drinking water source. They continue to dam more of the water up and hold more of it back. The consequence of that is downriver, they're letting less fresh water go on. So Alabama, Georgia, and Florida have been in these water wars for the last 20 years.
But when we're talking about the water wars, a lot of times what we do is we focus on Atlanta and them holding the water, which is true. And that is one piece of the puzzle, if you will. Because what you have to do, and the Corps of Engineers is supposed to do, is balance the needs with the resources so that Florida, Georgia, and Alabama can all share and have an adequate amount of water. We believe firmly that they have not done that, and the Corps has not done that. They've allowed too much water to be held back by Atlanta for development purposes. And we know people, you have to have water to survive, but at the same time, our natural resources must have water as well. So we believe that Atlanta needs to do a better job of planning, a better job of permitting, and make sure that we get more water downstream. It's a lack of flow of water that's causing the problem.
The Corps of Engineers was authorized by Congress in the 1940s to construct 5 federal reservoirs primarily on the Chattahoochee River, but the lowest dam is right at the confluence of the Flint and the Chattahoochee, where they come together and form the Apalachicola. When they want more water to get downriver to the lower lakes, they have to release it from all the way up at the top of the Chattahoochee there at Lake Lanier.
One day, my dad asked me, and this was early in my career as a riverkeeper, he literally said, what's wrong with the dam? I said, well, lots of things and nothing. You know, it depends on your point of view. I mean, you can store water, you can use that water, those are good things. You can, if it's managed properly, help mitigate floods and do some flood control. You can't eliminate floods, but you can mitigate them. You can enhance property values. You can create a type of fishery where one wasn't there. But Dad, when you dam it, it's no longer a river or a creek. So you're fundamentally changing it from a flowing water system to what's essentially a standing water system. And so the values and functions of that particular segment of the ecosystem change fundamentally when you do that. The problems in the Flint are flow problems, and that's what people care about that support Flint Riverkeeper, and obviously that's what also connects us to Florida and the Apalachicola. Literally, when you're sitting here at my house in the Flint watershed, you're in the Apalachicola River watershed. That's the watershed we're sitting in. But the sub-watershed is the Flint.
It's a stochastic effect naturally. Sometimes you have a good flood, sometimes you don't. And when you add on the additional stress of someone upstream controlling the valve of that flow coming down, it puts an additional risk on that matching of the river discharge with the spawning event of those groupers. And when those two events don't match, or if they don't happen at all, you don't have a good year class, and many times you have a complete collapse of that particular year class. If the groupers go ahead and spawn and there's no blooming phytoplankton and subsequent blooming of the zooplankton, the larval fishes have nothing to eat, and we don't have a good strong year class to continue the population as it should be.
I think when the oyster decline happened in the later 2000s, that's when a lot of people started noticing, well, what's going on here? You know, I can't get oysters anymore. They're not Apalachicola oysters, and so people started to kind of pay attention. They didn't understand necessarily how freshwater flow is needed to make it into the estuary. Many people are very familiar with Apalachicola Bay. They spend time at the beach, they spend time at St. George Island. Franklin County is a really fun place, tourist-based economy with people coming in and enjoying restaurants and eating out. And when we saw that the oysters decline, it was pretty remarkable to see suddenly more people paying attention.
This isn't all about oysters. Oysters just gets all the headlines. It's also about shrimp, crabs, redfish, trout, the shad that run up and down the river, the garfish that nobody has respect for. I mean, it's about all of it. There's a lot of opportunity to fix that. And in a river with dams on it, you actually have that opportunity to tune that estuary back towards something that's more productive. But we so far have not taken that opportunity. We've done just the opposite.
As we know, the big challenge for the Apalachicola River is sustainable freshwater flows. So there are 15 to 17 dams and reservoirs of various shapes and sizes on this river system. And the Woodruff Dam, which is behind us in Chattahoochee, Florida, which holds back what is now Lake Seminole, is where that freshwater is. So water is released from the dam, comes downstream.
And then there are storage reservoirs. And on the Chattahoochee side of the ACF system, we have three that are, I think it's three, that are designated that way, and two that have a lot of volume. And those two are Lake Lanier and West Point. And the way that those reservoirs are managed dictates everything that happens downstream and allows everything that happens downstream.
Legally, they've maneuvered, Florida has, Alabama has, to try and gain access or change this. And at the end of the day, we've done almost we're at the last thing that is even possible, and that was from the state to sue a state. It's only happened 200 times or in the history of the country. It just doesn't happen much where a state sues another state.
Litigation creates big obstacles for people to communicate clearly. So if I'm suing you, you might not want to talk to me. And so regrettably, with the ongoing litigation, people that once were talking very openly and working collaboratively together, that has made it more difficult to participate in that process. So I'm hopeful personally that after the Supreme Court ruling, best case scenario is something really exciting happens on January 8th, and perhaps the Supreme Court in its infinite wisdom says, y'all need to share the water, and this is how I want you to go about doing it. That would be a really great solution.
A state legislature can't do anything, so that's why this has been on a federal level, because this is all of Georgia versus all of Florida versus all of Alabama. So even in Congress, politically, say all 20 members, 22 members of Congress, however many we have, say they all agreed on a bill, and they have, and the two senators agree to that, they would still have to get the other 400 congressmen out there to agree on a bill for it to pass.
But we have to depend on our federal representatives in Washington, and we have to depend on the good graces and the good intentions of those for Georgia as well. It's really turned into a Florida, Alabama versus Georgia issue, and again, it's a federal issue. So we have to depend on our federal officials to do what's right, and what's right is to turn more water loose, turn it loose and let it come down the Apalachicola River and provide the nourishment that the whole basin and the bay needs.
The freshwater is the driver of the productivity of the whole ecosystem. The Corps don't really have the capacity to hold a lot of water up there permanently, but they can modify or moderate the release of the timing, of the releases of the flow. And that timing of how the ecosystem down in the Apalachicola portion of the basin functions is critical to how the entire ecology works down there.
Not only is it necessary to ensure a certain volume of water comes down into the Apalachicola Bay, but the pulsing of this water, mimicking a natural scenario or natural phenomenon, is also important. We like to think about water in terms of the volume that comes down the river, but when we have a flood situation, the river is normally contained within a channel, but under flood conditions, it spills out of its banks and floods the surrounding forest, the floodplain. And basically what that does is the water kind of scours those floodplains and washes nutrients, leaf litter and things like that back into the river channel. The discharge of the Apalachicola Bay is felt far offshore on these mesophotic reefs, and the delivery of those nutrients offshore stimulates a nice phytoplankton and zooplankton bloom that directly benefits these commercially important grouper species that our local economy depends on.
You have the phytoplankton, the nutrients, the mixing of the fresh and the salt water, all that comes together, and that's where a lot of it happens for the productivity of the bay. And as that supports that whole food chain that eventually is moving out into the saltier parts of the bay and the Gulf. So you have that whole ecosystem going on there, and then those species that are out in the Gulf have spent part of their life cycle there in the bay, and then as they grow up and mature, they move offshore. And what they have found is that that same load of nutrients and fresh water will also go out into the Gulf over 250, 300 miles offshore, and is nourishing the habitat for the mature species offshore of those same Gulf species that grow up inshore. So you have the ecosystem literally begins all the way up in the headwaters of the Georgia, Alabama, where you have a totally different ecosystem, but that water is driving what's happening all the way through this ecosystem out into the Gulf, 250 miles.
How we share water in future years, I believe, will be one of the #1 issues of our time as we deal with climate change and growth management, how rivers and water systems across the nation, that's going to be something that we'll all be dealing with. Water is a natural resource. It's not a new resource. And there's no new water on the planet. A lot of people don't know that. I was in my 20s before I figured that out. I was at a class and I learned that, oh, wait a minute, water is not, it's just not abundant. It's not everywhere. I can't just, there's never any new water on the planet. It's the same water being recirculated. We're using it over and over and over and over and over.
It's not just the Flint, it's not just the Chattahoochee, it's not just the Apalachicola and its bay. This is a really large ecosystem that either works together or it doesn't, you know, as the case may be. And right now I submit that it's partially broken. But we can fix this and get it functioning not as some ecosystem before Andy Jackson committed his war crimes and ran all of the Native Americans out of this ecosystem. We're not trying to get it back to that. We're just trying to get it back to something that's equitable, you know, something that actually works for almost everybody, if not everybody, as opposed to just working really well for a few.
There is a water management or water sharing plan that was put forth by a stakeholders group. The Apalachicola Chattahoochee Flint stakeholders group spent years working together collaboratively saying, we know we can share the water, let's figure out how we can do that equitably. We know there's enough water in the system to make that happen. Does that require sacrifices on everybody's part? It sure does. But those folks agreed it could be done.
It's a group of people, a 56-member board, plus additional funders and members, that was organized not quite 10 years ago. The notion arose and became incorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit. And it was established with the goal of providing a plan to share water among all the different user groups in the Apalachicola Chattahoochee Flint system without litigation. Now, litigation has interrupted the ACF stakeholder process. It has made the ACF stakeholder process more complex, but it's not ACF stakeholders that has been pursuing the litigation. It's ACF stakeholders is about another way entirely.
The outcome of that over about 7 years of effort and spending $1.7 million that we raised privately was the development of a sustainable water management plan for the ACF basin. And this is a plan that we had to agree to by consensus of 56 governing board members in the ACF stakeholders.
It is a template that's designed to begin to actively manage the water in the ACF basin in a better way. And that includes conservation and restoration of flow. It also includes the way that the Army Corps of Engineers manages the releases from the impoundments. And those are two mules that have to be hitched to the same wagon. If you don't have conservation, then the way the Corps manages the water is very limited. They'll have a limited amount of water to work with. If you don't have the Corps then all the conservation in the world is not going to change the way that the Corps allows water to be released from Woodruff Dam during drought operations.
The way we got consensus around the plan was to put something in it for everybody. So if you pick and choose stuff that will help one person and not help, don't do the thing that the other person helped, you will defeat the purpose of reaching a consensus on a collaborative document. But it is, it has some great recommendations for the Corps of Engineers, for the 3 states, whether you're a water manager or a fisheries manager or whatever. It is all very much a cohesive starting point for the states to sit down and say, well, maybe we can do this and it'll help everybody.
Everybody that's in the ACF system needs to be concerned about the Army Corps and how they manage those dams on the Chattahoochee, and then that one dam that's on the Flint and the Chattahoochee simultaneously. I guess technically it's on the Apalachicola because it's about half a mile below or downstream of where the Hooch and the Flint come together. That's all buried in Lake Seminole. But everybody needs to be concerned about that. And every river system on the planet is the same, and every river system on the planet is different. What's the same about them is they get their water from somewhere, either from the sky or from the ground or both. But then they're different in terms of rainfall or snowfall amounts, their geologies, and how much man has messed with them. When we first started talking with folks in the ACF stakeholders arena, people across the table from me would get so mad and irritated when I used the R word. It's almost like it was a dirty word to talk about restoring something. They wanted to conserve it like where it is. I'm like, no ma'am, no sir. We can't conserve it where it is because it is in the toilet. I mean, this is not an acceptable place for it to be, either with the Corps or with the flow itself. We've got to change some things. More really is better in terms of flows. And also in this case, properly harnessing those flows through the Corps' operations amps it up even more with benefits to folks outside of Georgia.
I've gone on and worked in different areas and come back here to St. Teresa, Florida, which is right next door to the Apalachicola Bay, and find that we're still faced with many of the exact same issues, particularly related to the water wars that I studied as an undergraduate 23 years ago. I sincerely hope that we can work together to solve some of these issues and make sure that all 3 stakeholders get what they need out of the river and maintain a good, healthy ecosystem.
If you leave Mother Nature be, she'll kind of work out the pluses and minuses of the ebbs and flows. It's when we start interfering that we throw off the balance. And everywhere you see this, man is the one that interrupts that balance and causes the problem. So, and here it is once again. That's exactly what the cause of this is. The root of all of it is us. It's us as human beings.
Things have got to change, you know. Things have got to change where people come together and they want to see it get better. Otherwise, it ain't never going to get better. It's just going to get worse.
So we all have to keep talking to each other. We have to remain committed to working collaboratively and recognize that, yeah, we can make this work. We can share the water, and let's agree to do it and make it happen. For example, there's farmers that have self-imposed tougher watering practices, and they're doing that because they know that's what they need to do to make their personal difference for the river system by using less water, using better best management practices for water consumption. And so continuing those type of practices and growing those could be helpful as well.
Let's be solution oriented. If you're a Georgian, then we need to be thinking about how we can conserve and help ourselves, our own economy, and influence the Corps to help our neighbors. That's the way I see it. And the Lake Lanier property owners don't have to lose. The Lake Lanier marine industry doesn't have to lose. The city of Atlanta and all of Metro Atlanta don't have to lose in this game. The farmers don't have to lose. Everybody can actually benefit and share a little bit of pain when you get into that 2.5 or 3 year section of the drought, but you're going to be out of it pretty quick. This is not Georgia versus Florida in a football stadium where there's a winner and a loser and you go into overtime if it's a tie. That's not what this is. There's enough water in this system to share properly.
The Apalachicola River and the whole ecosystem of the Apalachicola, to me, represents a place that's kind of in a step at a time where it was spared from many of the impacts that we normally see on rivers. The bay is one of the most productive estuaries in the whole northern hemisphere. And you can travel around and you can see places that were like that but have been decimated by development of some sort or another. And so it became for me an opportunity to try to protect this one last great bay and river system that is such a cool place on earth.
Writing to your elected officials, calling elected officials makes a big difference. So letting folks know that you care about this place and you expect them as our public servants to help us protect it is very powerful. And so always, of course, I'm walking around encouraging folks, sign up for our newsletter, get on our email list, visit our social media so that we can all learn as much as we're comfortable learning and put that care into action and help protect this really magical place. We've had a lot of victories over the years in terms of protecting water and doing right by the river and getting people to understand how to protect and working with people who really care. There's so many victories and good things that we do. I like to encourage people to be involved, not discourage people, and make them feel like we can't make a difference when I know that we can. So that's kind of what keeps me going in a volunteer capacity and trying to get other folks to speak up and be heard and come out and play and learn about this place.
Some who may not know much about our river and the basin of the bay need to know it's a pristine area. There's no other place in the world like it. It has so many different plants and animals. It's just amazing. It's an amazing piece of the world.
Florida has difficult times ahead, but I think maybe the answer is looking into our past a little bit to see where we've had our successes and why parts of the state are special and why the Apalachicola is such a special. I rank the Apalachicola alongside, Biscayne and the Big Cypress and the Everglades because it is such a unique, special, not just natural history, but cultural history.
You got to respect what you have and just be respectful of those that's trying to make a living in the industry.
What's not to love about being around this? I mean, this is the view I have out of my office. And getting a good premium product to sell on the market for people to take home to their family and to eat. I mean, whether it's sitting around a fire eating a dozen oysters or if it's having the family over and having a low country boil and eating oysters and shrimp, I enjoy selling a good product for people to eat. We used to sell a lot of oysters to a lot of people all over the country. And Apalachicola oysters are world famous, they say. They just got that good sweet flavor to them. When you got the mix of salt and fresh water, and it's, I would say, prestige, without a lot of the pollutions that you get around a lot of your other bays that have oysters. You know, you don't have the buildup of homes and concrete and runoff into the bay, you know, and it's just a good way of life.